seemed like they slowed down a little bit. Like we were catching 150 lanes a trip, and now it seems like we're only catching 70.
They did. We didn't have any lanes on this last trip.
Not a single one?
Not a single lane.
What's up with that?
I don't know if
to go from crazy lanes to no lanes.
Is that a water temperature?
It's a depth thing. It just depends on where they were fishing.
But I mean, depth-wise, generally, even when we're fishing 40 foot for hogfish, you still catch a couple lanes. But we see more lanes when we're out deeper, like 60, 70, 80 foot.
Yeah.
When we're targeting those red grouper. But still, it's to see no lanes. Nuts.
I'll tell you, I worked the Friday night snapper trip, and we crushed it. Some nice big mangoes. I think we were around 70 feet. I was with Monkey on that trip. Not mangroves.
There were some big lanes, or big mangroves.
Big mangroves. A few small lanes on that one. Yes, we did get a few on that one.
Even that trip though should have had a bunch of lane snapper.
Is it? I don't even recall if it's more of a closer to summertime thing or.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is maybe it's just water temperature. It's been colder.
It got really cold.
Yeah.
Really fast.
Really cold, really fast.
Earlier in the year.
Because it was like it almost. Mike was talking about this on the radio show. How like inshore, it this time of year is that transition period, right? Mm-hmm. So when it's cold and then it starts to warm up, the fish start to come out of the bays and stuff. But this year it was weird. Like it happened really early February. We got super nice weather. It warmed up, and the fish were kind of like, and they started to move, and then it got cold again, and then it warmed up a little bit for that like week and a half, and then it got cold again. And now this week we've got another 3 cold fronts, and it was warm last week, so I think the fish are just confused.
I think it takes a little bit for that cold, when it gets real cold, for obviously the top layers get cold first, and it takes a little bit for it to turn over, and it does ultimately make its way to the bottom.
Yeah.
And then, so there's a little lapse in, it takes a little bit of time after the cold fronts or that cold water, in the deeper waters.
I think it's a temperature thing. I agree with that. Got cold so quick. We got hammered, inundated with cold fronts until it warms up a little bit. Yeah. We start seeing more of the red groupers, the lane snappers.
Yeah. But the hogfish are biting now that it's cold, and once it warms up, the hogfish will slow down.
Yeah.
So it's like pick your poison. Wait until summer and get those red grouper and lots of lanes on the 10-hour, or go out now and get those hogfish and maybe a couple lanes and all your other gray snappers, if you will.
They should be.
If you really want to make it happen, throw on a suit, spear gun.
They get plenty of hogfish. They eat the metal shafts a little easier than the live shrimp. Milos, is that you? Weren't you on the 39-hour trip?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the 39-hour was better this weekend, huh?
Yeah, we actually picked along with some more mangroves, and we unfortunately got quite a few bit of gag grouper, unfortunately.
Dude, gags were crazy on the night snapper too, huh?
Yes, they were.
The gags they caught and had to release.
It's crazy. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's nuts. So the gags have been catch and releasing, but the mangroves on this 39-hour are huge.
Yeah, we went to...
Did you see the mangroves?
They were pretty big.
Off the boat? It was crazy. What was the big mangrove, do you know?
I think it was maybe a little over 7 pounds, one of them.
They're like 4, 5, 6 pounds. Like this cooler time of year, it seems like we're catching maybe less mangrove snapper, not quite as many, but the average size is a lot bigger on the overnighters. And it seems different because like when I was younger, 10, 15 years ago, these cooler months, we didn't see the mangrove snapper like this as much. It was more of a
we were able to keep gags. So the focus was
gags.
Gag grouper.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And this
That's
is
a
the
good
time
point.
of year for them. So
yeah.
Yes.
I think you could keep 5 per person probably.
Yeah.
So on an overnighter, it wasn't uncommon when we were younger for guys to get their 10 fish limit.
Yeah. 10 gags. Those were the good old days.
I wish they would come back, to be honest with you.
10 gags. That's crazy. Yeah. That's hard to even remember that. And it was, I think it was 20, or no, it was 18 inches at that time.
I don't ever remember it being less than 20.
It was 22. 22 when I
remember it being 20, but I don't remember.
I think when they went to 22, it was 4 fish.
It was 5.
It was 5 still at 22?
Yeah.
That's crazy. And I remember it used to be 18 though.
At one point.
Yeah.
I think that was a little before our time though.
Yeah.
I remember when gags used to be open back in April, it was freaking insane out there, especially the overnight trips on the Florida Middle Grounds, 50, 60 head and like nothing.
And also you had those...
On one drop.
Cat Matt, that was my last trip with Cat.
One drop. Yeah. And also that time of year, like it starts in like February-ish, but you start to see the gags get super aggressive all the way into April when they're spawning, and they come up on the surface when the water's really clear. You have that kingfish flatline out, and all of a sudden you'll get a gag on it. That's always super fun.
He'll come up and hit it up in the water column, bait,
Kingfish are almost here.
I know.
I'm starting to see lots of birds, concentrated bait balls in the, the 3 to 8 mile range. I'm starting to see a lot of that.
Bait balls already.
Bait balls, I'm seeing lots of birds over the bait balls. Yes, sir.
And you don't see bait balls unless something's pushing them to the surface.
That's correct.
Whether it's
Something's got them concentrated up at the top. Yes, sir.
Man. And they're saying on the radio show this past Saturday that there's a lot of mackerel action, like on the clam bar at the south end of the bay, and a lot of the flats out in front of Joe Island and around the Skyway already. There's a ton of mackerel. So if there's mackerel there should be mackerel starting on our beaches anytime now. The Egmont Key buoy was up to 70 degrees last week. Last night when I looked, it was 65, so it went back down. But we're on the doorstep.
I'd like to throw in also on some of those longer range trips, we're seeing a lot more mutton snappers, where we used to not see those at all up here 5 or 8, 10 years ago. Now we're seeing muttons, a few muttons at every trip, or every other trip a couple muttons.
There's some trips you catch in like 10, 12 muttons.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, that last 39 hour of 2024, we came in with over 30 plus muttons on the last trip of the year of last year. That was the most muttons I've seen in a long time.
Historic numbers. You know what's crazy is I was talking to Andrew off I think he runs the Caddy, the commercial boat up there, who's fishing the 29 all the way up there. No, the very north end of the grounds. So that's 28. And he was saying he was catching muttons north of the 28.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that nuts? That seems insane.
Speaking of muttons, my buddy actually in Panama City, they actually caught one last week in Panama City.
In Panama City?
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm not joking. That really did happen. He was out of Captain Anderson's over there.
Crazy.
Oh, yeah.
You know, behind Helene, the red grouper pushed up there really heavy. They don't catch a lot of red grouper out of Panama City Beach.
Gags.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they said that they were struggling to get their fish because all these little 18, 19-inch red grouper moved in behind the storms.
Well, that's good because they'll grow, and now you have another species, right?
And
to target.
Those storms move. That's probably the number one the thing that will move.
Tropical fish.
I mean for miles.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Storms move fish.
Well, red grouper specifically, recruitment events, when you look at like recruitment spikes on the CMAP trawl survey, where they trawl this net and they look at like age 0 fish, these microscopic fish and fish eggs, it's really interesting to overlay major hurricanes that move through the Gulf Basin with those recruitment events. Because you see a huge spike in recruitment almost every time behind a major hurricane. Like if a Cat 3, 4, 5 storm moves into the Gulf, you see a huge spike in recruitment. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about, Milos. It spreads those fish out, and now there's a big gap, hole, where new fish can move in because you have more estuary, you have more food, and all of a sudden you've got more space to grow. So it's pretty interesting how that works. Storms.
Yeah.
Push all these tropical fish up to the northern.
Yeah. Push the stuff around. Crazy stuff.
There's a big thought that Katrina was responsible for our red snapper influx in 2005.
It was more the pipe. They followed the pipe when the pipe was being built.
I think
As the pipe
everybody
was being
argues
built.
over that. whether it was
I guess
Katrina. And what was really interesting, like going to the Gulf Council meetings, 2015, 2016, 2017, the guys from Texas were like, oh, you guys in the Eastern Gulf off of Florida's coast, there's no red snapper over there. We've got them, like, we could walk across and they're everywhere. And now the conversation has switched. And the great red snapper count, when that happened in 2022, that actually showed and proved there's more red snapper biodiversity and a bigger biomass, bigger population of red snapper east of the Mississippi now. So the population
on
shift.
our side.
Yeah. The population shifted in the Gulf of Mexico.
All these fish are migratory, right?
I mean, technically reef fish aren't, but
are not migratory.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But the coastal migratory pelagics, like your amberjacks, your African pompanos, your cobias, your kingfish, your wahoos, those are migratory species.
Migratory.
But reef fish, they're not
Those are
supposed to be.
homesteaders, unless they're being pushed.
Gags move with their spawn. Red grouper are really they have a high sight fidelity where they kind of stay in an area.
Okay.
But red snapper, they've been doing more telemetry studies on them where they tag them with the acoustic receivers and kind of see where they move. And red snapper will move quite a bit.
Okay.
Miles and miles. But what's interesting...
I didn't know that. That's cool.
What's interesting is...
Invasive species.
What's interesting is I was talking to a scientist at the last MRET meeting, and in the Alabama reef fish, or in the Alabama artificial reef system, where you have big artificial reefs everywhere, there's a higher sight fidelity. So when there's more structure around, they're more inclined to stay on that piece of structure and not move. Whereas if there's a lot of structure, or if it's like the Florida coast where we live, and you've got these big limestone ledges, and you've got cracks, they'll spread out more and they'll move more frequently.
Interesting.
But like in Alabama on those reef systems, you have a reef here and you have a reef a mile away, but there's nothing but sand in the middle. They tend to just stay on the reef.
They're not going anywhere.
They're scared to cross that sandy patch. Whereas like in our area, we'll see it in the beginning of red snapper season. We're fishing 120, 140 foot, and then halfway into red snapper season, we're fishing 220 foot because we have to follow those fish. It's like they're running away from the fishing pressure or being caught, however you want to look at it. It's interesting.
Well, speaking of red snapper, me and Captain Garett, we talked about this, a few months ago, how the red snapper have taken over the bottom, and unfortunately, I think it kicked the gag groupers and the red groupers out there, because they eat a lot of food. The red snapper take over the bottom. There's no food for the groupers to get to because the red snappers eat them all. So most likely a resident gag or big red grouper or scant, they probably push off the places and went somewhere where there's not too much pressure on red snapper.
It's definitely a big question and a big problem, because when you manage a species right now, they look through blinders at, oh, red snapper, we need to rebuild red snapper, and they try to bring more red snapper, but what does that do to other populations? And the same thing goes for sharks. Oh, we need to rebuild sharks. We need to have these crazy rebuilding plans. We need more sharks. Well, if you got 1 million more sharks, what's that going to do to the rest of the food web?
We have a huge shark population.
Yeah.
We really do.
So that's what I'm getting at, though, is like you have to
never allow one species to thrive out over everything else.
Yeah,
right?
Magnus,
then it becomes invasive
unless you're human.
Unless you're us. Good touche.
Top predator, right?
Touche.
But that's the problem right now with the way the system is set up, is it dictates, Magnuson-Stevens Act dictates you have to rebuild a fishery, but it doesn't show what level that you should rebuild that fishery back to. So like, oh, red snapper are overfished, we have to rebuild red snapper. Well, they rebuilt red snapper, but they they picked a random, there's no dictated target. So like with sharks, they say, oh, we have to rebuild sharks. Well, they could keep rebuilding sharks until what's the target? Back to virgin populations, pre-man, prehistoric condition, or back to 10 years ago, 12 years ago?
Amount of shark attacks.
Around the coast of Florida.
And it's funny to think about, but that's honestly like what some scientist is deciding ultimately. It's like what level do we rebuild these fish back? And that's why now there's more of a move to like ecosystem-based fishery management. Because if you're going to manage sharks and rebuild sharks, what's that going to do to the downstream effects of the food web? Because you can't have an apex predator that is rebuilding out of control and has a huge population, because it's going to affect other species.
I heard there's a big shark issue in the Keys. Their bottom fishing's very tough, because if you get anything off of the bottom, all you're going to retrieve is a head. You're going to get a head.
The dry tortugas.
That's it.
It's not only the Keys, it's the East Coast too. You go to somewhere like Jupiter, like I have a lot of buddies that are from Jupiter area, and they're like, oh, this is the best fishery ever, oh, Jupiter. Well, you can catch sailfish off the beach there, cool. But like if you try to catch a reef fish and try to reel up a mutton, all you're going to get is a head.
Yeah.
Like you can't fish a spot more than 10 minutes until sharks show up.
And the dry tortugas is covered in sharks as well for bottom fishing.
Yeah.
It's really
the Gulf of Mexico, I think in our area, we don't have it quite as bad as some of these other people.
No.
Like the Northern Gulf around those rigs, dude, those sharks are crazy. Have you seen some of those videos of like they drop food off the rig and the sharks come up like dogs?
Go nuts. I have not. No.
It's nuts.
And I was going to say too, I think we really do have a healthy fishery, but I think the fish are going to go where the food is.
Yeah.
Where the bait is.
It's always the draw.
It's a cycle.
Yeah. Everything is cyclical. Well, thanks for your time, boys. Thanks for watching.